I'm Angellica Bell and welcome to Discussions Matter. This is a forum where the Metropolitan Police engages directly with London's diverse community. You'll get to see Londoners hold the Met to account for some of the issues that have dented its reputation, and equally you'll get an insight from the police personnel that are spearheading change from within the organisation. This is Discussions Matter. This episode looks at race and policing. Now, many will be aware the Metropolitan Police has faced stern criticism over the years regarding its culture and the way it treats ethnic minority groups. Today, we have a panel of guests who will be discussing why it's important for the Met to better understand the complexities of race issues and also get an insight into some of the work being done within policing to build bridges with the ethnic minority community of London. On the panel, we have Doreen Sinclair-McCollin. Now, Doreen is a trained and experienced behaviour consultant and also founder of Elevated Minds, an initiative that supports young people from inner city areas to develop emotional intelligence. Dr. Marianna is a reader in criminal justice at Birmingham Law School. She has a special interest in issues surrounding citizenship, criminal justice and necessary reform. And also Joseph Charm, who is a partnerships manager working within corporate digital transformation. Now, in his spare time, he is also a stand-up comedian and has strong personal views on police interactions with London's public. On behalf of the police, we have Detective Inspector Amakai Kefas, who has worked in a variety of uniform and detective roles, including Homicide Command and neighbourhood policing. She is currently leading a number of diversity and inclusion initiatives within the police. Chief Superintendent Boothe, he is the Programme Director for the London Race Action Plan, which seeks to improve the policing experience for Black people in London. He's also currently leading on the Met's drive to increase the number of underrepresented groups to consider a career in policing. And Detective Chief Inspector Neil Rawlinson, who is currently a Senior Investigating Officer on the Homicide Command and runs a team of officers dedicated to investigating homicide offences, predominantly in the northwest area of London. Well, we appreciate you all being here today, and I think we shouldn't beat around the bush. I think we should just go straight in with it, because we know there is a massive disconnect between the Met and the needs of the ethnic minority communities. So where are we right now, Jeff?
I think as an organisation, the Met is, in terms of confidence, is at an all-time low. I think what is encouraging is that we've got a commissioner and a management board that actually recognises that there is an issue and that they've put in place the initial stages of a turnaround plan to try to address those issues. But I think we have to be very, very real about it, and we have to recognise that it's not only an external issue, but it's also an internal issue. We've got many officers and members of staff that need to have the confidence that we've got an organisation that really wants to make a change.
So I think there's a need to remember a few things when we're talking about ethnic minorities in policing. The first thing that I think is really important is the headline of the Macpherson report, over 20 years ago, that ethnic minority communities face two problems. One is over-policing, but under-protection is another one, which is very serious. If you are a member of an ethnic minority community in this country, you are disproportionately more likely to need the police. You're much more likely to be a victim of a hate crime. People of mixed race or mixed ethnicity backgrounds are much more likely to be victimised, but all minority ethnicities are more likely than white people to be victimised. That means that if policing is a public good, if that is the idea that when you're in trouble, there's someone you can call to come and help you, these are the people who most need the police. If we're all equal before the law and the law serves us, members of ethnic minority communities need the police. But about 50 years of sociological study give us the knowledge that that is a difficult thing to do, because calling the police may actually cause you trouble. And in relation to the Metropolitan Police, particularly the gangs matrix is deeply problematic. the failure to differentiate between victims and perpetrators on a database, which a police force would then share that information with housing providers, the Department of Work and Pension and schools. Those kind of things resonate in ethnic minority communities and must make people reasonably wary of asking for the help even though they most need it. And I think as much as Jeff is being positive, and I think there is a lot of evidence of positive change, we need to remember that we have gone from the Scarman Review to the Macpherson Review to the Lamy Review and even reading the Seawell report, and we hear about the attempts to change things for the better, and nevertheless we see things like headlines like the Metropolitan Police having to be taken to court before they actually address the problems of the gangs matrix, before they recognise that it is discriminatory and in danger of certainly likely to be breaching privacy rights under Article 8 of the European Court of Human Rights. So members of ethnic minority communities can hear the headlines, can hear the nice words, we're trying to improve things. But the hard fact is, in 2018, the Information Commissioner put the Met on notice that the gangs matrix was problematic and discriminatory. Nevertheless, Liberty had to take them to court. It was a few days before literally litigation in front of the High Court of Justice before the Metropolitan Police responded and said, actually, you know what, this mechanism is unlawful and we need to reform it. That's not something that's going to imbue trust.
So, summing up what you said, it's almost like an abusive relationship with, between the communities and the police, and we can't underestimate history and the weight of history and the things that have happened which are impacting what's going on right now.
That's one of the things, when I meet very well-meaning police officers, and there are loads of them, there are loads of really well-motivated, well-meaning police officers, very often the sad thing I have to say to them is, remember, you're not starting from a clean slate. The idea that we have guidance on stop and search which says this is a civic duty, which indicates every ordinary reasonable person will comply with a police officer. That's not true. If David Lammy, a member of Parliament, has told communities that this is the gateway for disproportionate imprisonment and death at the hands of police, how are you supposed to trust? How are you supposed to do that, no matter how well-meaning? And that's also the challenge for good police officers, that the history is there, you cannot get away from it.
Well, Doreen, actually, one of the things that you say is that local members of communities are never involved in helping to bridge this gap.
And that's a problem, isn't it? And listening to everything you were just saying, I sat here thinking, the Commissioner said more trust, less crime, higher standards. And in ethnic minority communities, you've got less trust, more crime and lower standards. This is how we feel. And all the work that we do with the communities, with the young people in the community, they are tomorrow's future. They're the people we're looking for to make a difference. I hear everything you're saying, and there are reports after reports after reports, and they come out, it feels like every year, there's a new review, a new report, and it's about time we stop putting together reports, stop making recommendations. We've got so many. Yes, historically, the black community, ethnic minorities don't trust or believe in the police. We have to make a change, though. We have to do something about it. We can't just be sitting here around the table, as we've done. I've been doing it for years, part of so many discussions, and saying, but we've had enough, we need a change, we're not doing anything about it. So working with the young people is going in and meeting people like Jeff, meeting officers like yourself, and seeing the person behind the uniform, seeing the person as a human being, but giving them an opportunity to see the young people as young people, giving those young people a voice, and so training them to go and work with the Met and say, actually, this is what we've experienced, this is our journey, this is our first-hand experience, this is how you have treated me. Why? Giving them a space to talk to them and give them explanations, but also to show them what's going to change and work with them to make sure the change is there. I'm not saying miracles will happen. What I'm saying is we need to take the first step as a community, because it affects us more.
You think the community has a part to play in it?
Absolutely. I think the Met has got loads to do. They've got a huge job to do. They've got loads of changes that need to happen. The culture has been institutional racist or racism for years, and we know that. We also know that there are officers who want to make a difference, and we're working with those officers. And the officers are coming and talking to the young people and giving them an opportunity to get to know them. But the community, yes, we have to do something as a community and say, okay, we've had enough. We're not doing this anymore. We want to work with you, Jeff, to make sure this change happens. We want to work with yourself, to make sure that when we are stopped and searched on the street, it's not just disproportionate, it's not just undignified and disrespectful, but treat me like a human being and stop stopping me because of the colour of my skin, because I look like this.
Yeah, we know that some crimes disproportionately affect some ethnic minority communities. Stop and search, you've mentioned, Section 60 tactics have been highlighted, specifically targeting black men and boys. So these are the issues that have specifically led to the lack of trust and confidence. So how do the Met then improve this trust? I'm going to go to you, Amakai, first.
Gosh, how do the Met improve this trust? I think you've outlined some of the history that we have had, and I don't think that we are under any illusion about the history, the difficult history that policing has had with minority ethnic communities. And I think that in terms of answering your question, one of the things that I like about one of the initiatives that we've got going at the moment, particularly for new recruits, is about local knowledge, is about understanding the area that you're coming into, is about understanding that community that new recruit is coming into. And rooted in that is the history between the police and that particular community. I think that, I don't know, I can't give you an answer. I don't think that there is an answer. I certainly agree with Doreen that it's not a police-only answer. I think that we all do need to come together and come around the table. I think that we live in this place, I think, as a police force, and I'm speaking for myself and my colleagues, that we live in this tension of hard-hitting facts that are truthful and they're honest and that we need to face up to. But then the question, how do we improve? How do we improve? And I see different examples and different initiatives that I think, actually, looking back when I started, that I think that would be really good. And I think that an understanding of the tensions or the history, should I say, between the community, real understanding of that community and the people that they're stopping and searching and engaging in is absolutely vital and really, really important. Do I have an answer about trust and confidence? I think that there are lots of things that are going on, and I think that the Commissioner's plan, More Trust, Less Crime and Higher Standards, is looking within us, actually, how do we raise the game? How do we raise our own standards in order to gain the trust of the community?
It must be tricky though, the mood at the moment, and obviously I'm not in the Met, and I'm learning myself, but what's been said, how are people feeling in the organisation?
I think there's a real impact with individuals. We see lots of really bad things going on. This you see in the media, and everybody that I speak to kind of says, yeah, but it's not me. It's not me. But as a collective, there are failing, and I think that there is a real lack of understanding within individuals as well as an organisation about what it's like. I have no idea what it's like to be a black man, and I never will. I would never truly know what that is like. But I might have an idea if somebody from the community comes in and gets to know me and my team and talks through some of our experiences together on both sides. And it's by understanding that I think we can make a positive difference. I've done this with some success with different things in a previous role before I moved to Homicide. For somebody like disability, for example, I had somebody come in and explain, this is what a day looks like for me. This is the things that I've been through, and this is how it's impacted on me. This is a good day, this is a bad day. For people on the team to get an understanding of what that's like. And I'd like to see us do something of a similar nature when it comes to race. I think there'd be real value in that, for somebody to come in and sit around a table like we are and go, this is what it's like for me. And this is how it's impacted me and why. And that's the important thing, is why I'm like this, or why it's had that impact. And for us to then get that real understanding, and I think that's the only way it's going to work. I think we need to have that understanding. But then there's that two-way street. And it's like, okay, this is why I as a police officer am doing this thing, whatever that thing might be. for there to be that understanding going both ways. I think we need to understand each other. We are a community, but there's a divide at the moment, and we need to bridge that gap.
Do you think some police officers feel they're on the back foot, so they
100%.
can't take those steps forward?
100%.
Well, they 100% are on the back foot, and rightly so. It's not like they're, as you say, you're not starting from a blank slate here, right? You know, we had the child queue incident that happened, just a few years ago, that just happened, that came out. And again, we're seeing more and more shocking, news articles come out about the atrocities that you're facing within your organisation. So from the outside, how you guys are being perceived by members of the public that are from ethnic minorities, if our own people are not being treated fairly and recognised as just equals within your institution, how on earth do you expect us to believe that you are for us in the streets? It's not possible to kind of get that.
But you do say, Joseph, that you think discussions matter.
No,
and people need to
100%.
talk.
100%. I think it plays a key role in moving things forward, in change. It's great that, you know, we're getting to a point where it's like, okay, where we need to hold our hands up, but we need more of that now, and the Met need to take those steps. I 100% agree with you, Doreen, in that the community need to do it, because it's a multifaceted issue.
Absolutely.
There's so many different parts and roles that need to be played by many different people. However, it needs to be led by the Met Police, because for me, it's just, it's exhausting.
I'm not even sure that I agree with it being police. I mean, so there are things that the police need to do, but I think, to be fair, the child queue incident, I think, is really important. And of course, we can look in that and we can zone in that on as a police failing, and there are doubtless police failings in that as well. But if you look at the report that Hackney wrote, there were also failings by the teachers. There was a failure to recognise that the criminal justice system provides a child with a clear right that no stop and search should have taken place without an appropriate adult present, right? And the police officers, of course, made a mistake by not making sure that the law was followed. But they were not the only people in that space with statutory duties towards that child. And I also think that that's another thing we do need to talk about. It's not even the communities, it's not just the police. There are also society, exactly, the whole community is made up of lots of other people. And we have an interest in nurturing our children, educating our children, providing safe spaces for those. And Child Q is a story of police failure, but to focus only on the police failure is to kind of also find the easy scapegoat and actually not look ourselves in the eye and say, maybe we're placing too much worth in policing, maybe we are asking too much of policing, and maybe we need to step up and do better by our children altogether. And just as I say a police officer should know they don't have a clean slate, a teacher should maybe know that a black child might need additional protection if they call law enforcement, right? And so, to be fair to the police, I think we also need to have a broader discussion about what is policing for, and what can police do, what can we reasonably ask police officers to do, and what should somebody else be doing?
Right, so I don't necessarily disagree with you on any of those points, but it's definitely worth raising that, given the focal point of the conversation being on the Met Police, that's where it needs to be highlighted in the role that they played in that particular incident. You are 100% correct in that other factors, other people, other members of the community need to be held to account, to the same account that the Met Police were being held to in that incident. What I'm saying is these conversations that need to be happen, they 100% need to be led by members of the community who are placed to serve the community, right? And this is the challenge, right, that I've noticed. We've got this weird idea that the Met Police is a separate beast to the community, when in actual fact, it's one community.
Absolutely.
The Met Police are the community. But because there is that separation, it's this weird kind of, I guess, relationship that people have in terms of how we interact and how we move those conversations forward. Do you want to know how to move the conversations forward? It's not by structuring formal meetups with members of the community to talk to the Met Police and say, hey, this is what I go through on a day-to-day as a black man. Because the reality is, if you don't have black friends, if you don't have Asian friends, if you don't have people in your network that are from these places, you're never going to understand.
But then Doreen and Neil say this, at least that's a start, you know.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I'm saying is that the village concept is so important. You know, you've got the police, the Met, the MPS there, you've got education there, you've got health there. There's disproportionality across all three. And so black people are not treated fairly, they are not treated with respect. In all areas, it begins in school, it begins in education, and in fact, if you go right back, it begins in the home, because my dad used to tell me, don't have anything to do with the police, you cannot even look at them because they'll arrest you, they'll do this, that. He's never been stopped by the police, ever, he's never been in trouble. But you see, historically, in all black families, the police, ethnic minorities, the police does the wrong thing when it comes to a black person. So parents think they're protecting their children by saying, don't trust them, don't talk to them, don't do. And I'm saying to these parents and to these young people, actually change your narrative. The only way you can change your narrative is to speak to these officers, go in and train these officers, work with these officers, see these officers for who they are. And if you really want to change things, then you've got to be part of that system to evoke change from the inside. And I'm not saying to every young person, get up, go and join the police and do. What I'm saying is speak to them, know who they are, know what they're about, call them out if you think they're doing wrong, but do it appropriately. As a young black man sitting there, and I was listening to you speak and think, you can influence so many other young black people, but then so can Jeff. I've been to funerals of many young people or several at least, who I've taught, and I've received phone calls from young people who are in prison for murdering people who they went to school with, who I taught. And so, the community needs to be able to talk to the police. They need to build that trust, because they're frightened. Parents are frightened, and so they are starting to talk now, because we're working so hard with them to say, you cannot fight this battle by yourself. We're losing our kids.
It's interesting that you say that, because I was thinking about my own personal experience as being a borough commander of Croydon, an area which I live in, went to school in, my parents live in, so I felt like I had a personal affinity. And at the time I was the borough commander there, we had a number of fatal stabbings. I think we had 4, one week after the other. I took it personally to actually go and speak to the families, those that would be prepared to allow me to go. And there's an incident that sticks with me today. One of the mothers of the children personally invited me to the funeral, and she asked me to say a few words. Now, when I walked into the room, I was in a uniform, and you could hear rumblings, people saying, why is he here? And the mother stood up and said, he needs to be here because I asked him to be here. And she then turned around and said, the reason I've asked him here is because I want to know who killed my son. But I know that somebody in this room knows who killed him. But you're expecting this person, this officer, to find out who killed my son, but you won't provide him the information. Yet you're prepared to criticize him and the organization for not finding who killed him. So the point that Doreen is making is, we really do need to make a real effort in terms of building true relationships. The point that you made and you've made is about, we as a policing service, not a police force, because we provide a service, we have got to be on the front foot. We talk about being anti-racist and asking people to come to us. No, we've got to be going out into the community, because if we do not know what our community think, it's our responsibility to educate ourselves and ask people to provide us with that information. Too many times in the past, we have waited for things to be done for us. We've got to make the steps. And the points you made about stop and search and the gangs matrix is a classic example. We have this collective amnesia, no one takes responsibility, and if we're going to bring it about at a senior level, because it's got to come from a senior level, because officers at grassroots levels are doing the work. They are engaging. But people like myself, Neil, and others at a senior level have a responsibility to come up with a plan to work with key people to bring about lasting change. And it won't happen if we just bury our head in the sands or bury our head in reports with recommendations that do not get done and people are not held accountable. That is where the true talk needs to occur. And that at the moment isn't happening. That's why these discussions are so important. And I'm hoping that as we move forward, we get young people and we get some really senior officers in the room to be able to address the elephant in the room, which is, we know what the issue is, but people aren't standing up and actually being held accountable.
I mean, Jeff, that is such a powerful story. I mean, it just really makes you think. And just to bring you in, Neil, as a senior policeman who's probably had different experiences, can you tell us what it's been like for you as well?
Yeah, I mean, certainly in the homicides, a lot of them, it's completely disproportionate how homicide impacts on ethnic minorities compared to the population of London. Last year, I think in London, it was something around 64% of homicide victims were from ethnic minorities, and that's just wrong. You've already mentioned it, violence is disproportionate. And I've been faced with situations myself where there is this wall of silence. I've only last May did an anniversary appeal for an unsolved murder, and released moving footage, video footage of the suspects, and nothing, absolutely nothing came back. No intelligence, no information, not even an anonymous Crime Stoppers piece of information. And it is, for us as detectives, it's tragic. We want to solve the crime. We're not there not to solve the crime. Not a single member of the Homicide Command thinks I'm not going to bother. That isn't the case. It is, we want to solve this. We're there. We've chosen to be there. People have had to go through an interview process and selection process to come and work on our teams. They want to be there. They want to solve these crimes. But you're absolutely right, Doreen. I need the community's help. I can't do it all by myself. I need people to come forward, give us the names and things like that, and then we can progress this together because we are part of the community. And it has a massive impact. It really, really does.
From an expert's point of view, I'd be interested to know, about the psychology of this and what you've studied.
In relation to homicide?
No, in relation to, wanting the community to come forward to help solve things and resolve things, but at the same time... But
I think it resonates with the point that, so I'm not a psychologist, can't claim that expertise at all, but I think what resonated with particularly what's been said, but with what Doreen said as well, is changing the narrative. It's also about changing the expectation. I think, I work in a different context, and even there, I can see the legacy of slavery. I can see the legacy of, black families who've experienced generations ago that systems that were supposed to be helping them were actually trapped, so they don't trust them. And the police who are supposed to be helping were actually a colonial tool, so they don't trust them. And it's amazing how that intergenerational victimization, how that translates into a cultural and a family memory of being treated unfairly. And that is something that needs to be addressed. And I've seen it, so, I live in Birmingham, I work in Birmingham at the moment, but I've seen it, for example, for me, hearing my students after the Manchester bombing responding, saying what they were doing in the afternoon, and saying that they were going to they were recommending internet sites to each other about where to go to tell them where to stand on a public transport platform so that no one could push them in front of a train, because they were veiled Muslim students and they were worried about being killed as in the vengeful atmosphere that followed a terrorist atrocity. And I go then to CTAG at West Midlands Police and I tell the officers that, and they are horrified. They are horrified to think the members of their community are in fear for their lives, taking proactive steps to prevent being homicide victims, and they have no idea about it. So I've been talking to my students and saying, why aren't you asking the police for help? Why aren't you telling the police that you have this need? And that's when you notice that there is a real barrier. It doesn't occur to them to talk to the police because of the history. And I think we need to change that as well. As citizens of colour, we need to recognise somehow, to try to find the courage to be citizens of colour and to demand that we are not second-class citizens and that we want to get the service we deserve. And we do have allies within the police do that, but only if we make those demands can they possibly be met. And the problem is, as I said, there are differences in victimisation. In relation to what Neil was saying, as a black person, you are much more likely to be killed by a stranger than a white person is, right? Which will make homicide investigations more difficult, for example, I imagine. So there are differences as well, but we need to communicate, and that experience, actually that experience of crime, but also the fear of being stopped and searched and the fear of the police. We need to start talking about that honestly, to demand that the police are the gateway for justice for all, you know. But the police need, I do agree, Jeff, the police need to very proactively seek that out, but we need to find the courage as well. And I think that's where educators also, for example, have a job in, we know things about our communities that I don't think the police know. And we take it for granted, and it's our world and we see it, the police don't, and we need to talk a lot more. Discussions really matter.
Now, Jeff, you mentioned about representation, so did you, Doreen, and you are fronting a drive to increase numbers from women and the black community into the police. Mm-hmm. Tell us about that and what's happening.
So yeah, I lead, one of my roles is to lead for what's called an outreach team, and our overall aim is to increase the numbers of women, people from underrepresented groups with a particular focus on the black community. Now, the way that we go about it, there's 4 strands to it. The first strand is about rebuilding trust and confidence, because if you look at women, because of what's happened with Sarah Everard, any woman would have second thoughts about joining the Met, understandably. If you look if you're from the black community, historically, you will have challenges to say, why should I join an organisation that up until now still will not publicly admit that there are issues in terms of racism, or they'll use different terms. So our job is to actually build lasting relationships. The last thing that our team looks to do is run an event, go to somebody and say join, because there's no authenticity. So it's about, over a period of time, building up that trust and confidence, doing initiatives where people start to see you more than just an officer. And they start to build a relationship, and they say, you know what, there's a group of people that I can aspire to, and I think I might actually look to do that, because by doing that role, I can help my community. I can ensure that there's a more representative police service. So when I call 999, there's a more likelihood that someone that turns up that looks like me, that can understand, can empathise, and I don't have to have that initial fear that they're going to see me as the suspect rather than the victim. So that takes time. The next stage is then to inform them about real fantastic opportunities to join the Met. You can gain a degree, you can go to university free of charge. Now, when you start speaking to some members of the family and saying, could you imagine someone in your family gaining a degree free of charge, no student debt, they start to think, oh, this sounds interesting. Why didn't anybody tell us that? And then you need to then get key community leaders, influencers, to spread the message, because it's not the message, it's who delivers it. If Jeff Boothe, even though I'm black, goes into a certain area, they don't know me, they're not automatically going to say, yeah, okay, great. But it's by working with people like Doreen that have already got that invested collateral within the community. By Doreen saying it, it's more likely to encourage people to join. And then the final stage is, what support do we give people to make that brave decision to join the organisation? Because it's not just about joining, it's about retention, it's about progression, and if they decide to leave, what was their experience? Because if it's a bad experience, they're going to tell friends and family, which makes our job even harder to bring people in. My other role is to lead as Programme Director of what's called the London Race Action Plan, which is ultimately looking to improve the policing experience for the black community. Now, there's so much work that needs to be done, and I need to be working with so many different stakeholders to deal with issues, legacy issues of stop and search, all of these different things. It's not going to happen overnight, but it starts off by having people from diverse backgrounds at the strategic table to shape the approach. Because all too long, unfortunately, we've had groups that have made decisions that have been ill-informed, and they haven't had the input of key black and ethnic leaders that can shape the approach. If I was talking about issues affecting women, and you had a room that was full just of men, it might dawn on them that they need to have some women in the room. It's the same with race. That's what we need to be doing.
And Amakai, from your perspective, do you see this as a positive step?
I do see it as a positive step. I wanted to make a point around recruitment and retention. And one of the things that I wanted to talk about, and I hope that I'm not going to sort of scatter conversations here, but you know, I'm a black officer. I am a member of the community, so are my colleagues, a number of my colleagues are, and we choose to do this job. We want to do this job, we love to do this job, and we are very aware of sometimes the historical, the traditional, the cultural barriers that we have to go through to perhaps even join the police in the first place and even stay in the police in the second place. But the point that I wanted to make, and it relates to recruitment and retention, is around the difficulty and the challenges that we have in doing our job when we are faced with our own communities, with members of our own communities. And I'm not just talking about black people, I'm talking about Asian people and other minority ethnic groups who also talk about the difficulty, and if I can just be honest, sometimes the abuse and the insults that we experience from our own community from doing our own jobs. And you know, I had a colleague talk about his own recent experience, and you know, we talk about our families. These officers, we have to go back home. I'm not a uniform officer, and I think it's far more pronounced for uniform officers, that they have to go home and speak to their families, speak to their children, and come back the next day and choose to wear that uniform again and go out. And whilst we talk about the community and the police coming together to have conversations, I think that this is an area that we don't really talk about, and that we need to have a conversation around, because of course it makes it so much harder to recruit into the police, because if you have a family member that is saying, do you know what, I went to work today, you know, and I just wanted to do my job, and this is the abuse that I got, I was assaulted because I'm black and because I'm a police officer, and I have to go and face my children and my spouse at home. I think that's really tough, and that's a really, really tough order, a tall order, shall I say. And then I choose to stay here because I believe in what I'm doing, and I believe in the public good, and I want to do something about the fact that we have this chasm or this divide that needs to be bridged together. I believe in it, and I want to do something about it. And yes, it is difficult both internally and externally.
So we can see this is quite complex.
Yeah, and it's a really powerful point that you've raised, and one of the things I've taken personal responsibility for with my team. My team, over 60 members of staff, 65% of them are from ethnic minority backgrounds, 70% of the actual leaders are women. But I've been working with our occupational health department to make sure that we give them the right welfare support, because it is traumatic to be in a position where you are going out and you are getting abuse from members of your own community. You take that home. So we have been putting a plan in place, and I'm pleased to say that we're looking to roll that out across the Met, because other officers not doing this role, that they face it on a day-to-day basis. So it's a very live issue, but we are looking to tackle it.
And what about the role media plays in this? Because I know you have looked into this yourself.
Yeah, media play a huge role. They really do. When appeals go out, certainly for us, when we're trying to solve crime, I think the media need to do their bit as well, and for us to get the publicity that we need to solve these cases. They are part of our community as well. They live and die in our communities, and I really would like to have them on board as much as possible.
So positive and negativity from the media as well, isn't it?
Yeah, 100%. I think I do disagree slightly, only in the notion that putting the whole responsibility on the media to support the Met's, you know, perception is lazy, given the world that we're currently living in, because the Met can 100% control the narrative given world we're living in with technology and social media, and I have 100% control over how I can be perceived on the internet with what I put out there and how I interact and create a following and the messaging that I'm putting out there. It feels like there's not enough of investment from the Met Police to go out into those platforms and create their own channels for how they are perceived in the media, right? Because those are the channels where you can put out nice and clear statements for accountability for where things have gone wrong, where people will then start to engage and interact with you a lot more, versus it being very, very quiet, poorly managed, not really being looked at as something that's really, really important. And then something goes wrong, and then you need the help from the people that are in that realm where all of the bad news is spreading. It's like, oh, hey, by the way, we do have a social media. Here, let me interact with you. It's like, no, you're completely out of touch.
Totally understand, totally agree with that, yeah.
I think one of the important things for the ethnic minority community to have more trust, so there's less crime and higher standards, is that their interaction with the Metropolitan Police Service is positive. And so instead of just getting to know officers when you're being stopped and searched or arrested, give them opportunities to have positive interactions. And we do that by taking police officers into schools on aspirations days, having parents forums where officers come and meet parents and talk to them. We have to do a lot more of that, so people are seeing the officers, but the officers are seeing the community as well for who they are.
Can I just build on the point you're making about media? It's absolutely what we've got to do stuff differently. There's a traditional way that we've done it, with murderers' appeals, and we'll go through. But if we are really engaging with the community and we're doing it the right way, you've established those networks. The moment you have a message, you can use those networks to actually go out and get your message even further. Because if you bring young people in and you sit them down and you ask them, what's the best way for us to communicate with you? They will tell us. We then as an organisation have to adapt our approach to fit our target audience. Standing at the steps of New Scotland Yard reading out a prepared script might work for BBC, Sky and all the other stuff, but that's not going to get the target audience that we need. So the point you're making is absolutely spot on. We've got to change our approach and actually get ahead of the game to move forward.
And that means to include young black people especially, but young ethnic minority people who are coming to do the media, social media for the Met. There's so many things. There's so many young people who are in the Met, black people who I've met, ethnic minority who have nothing to do with it. Let them put their stories out there as well.
I'll share a very, very quick story which just reinforces the point that you're making. Third floor of the Metropolitan Police at New Scotland Yard is our media department. I went at a meeting with members of the Nigerian community, and we had a meeting in one of the rooms on the third floor. We came up in the lift, we walked through the media area. One of the gentlemen asked me, what department is this? I said, it's media. Over 90% of the people within our media department are white females. There are media agencies that are owned by minority organisations that up until now we have not been utilising. So why are we surprised that we're not hitting our target audience? So the point you're making is absolutely spot on. We've got to change our approach to get different results.
Jeff, I think you've just given yourself a nice little job there to do and sort that out.
We're already on the case.
Listen, thank you so much for sharing your experiences and talking so openly about this subject, because discussions matter.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It's been a pleasure.